Wireless operators Phillips and Bride worked tirelessly through the early morning hours, carefully looking over each part of the ship's Marconi equipment to find out which section had malfunctioned. They eventually discovered that the leads of the transformer had burned through inside the casing and came into contact with the iron bolts which held the woodwork and frame together. After carefully binding the leads with rubber tape, everything was back up and running in perfect order, though it was by then 5 a.m., and they had a backlog of messages to get through. More would no doubt be on their way through the pneumatic tubes from the inquiry office, and there was a strong possibility they'd be dealing with this backlog all the way to New York. Passenger traffic wouldn't be all they were occupied with, however, and over the course of the day, a number of ice warnings were received from Caronia, Nordam, America, and Baltic, all of which were acknowledged by Titanic. Passengers remembered that April 14th dawned bright and clear, but some rainfall was encountered shortly after daybreak. It didn't last too long, and Titanic later experienced sunshine, with a brisk 20-knot wind blowing in from the northwest, causing moderate seas and kicking up 6 to 8 foot waves. It's very likely that this wind, coupled with the rain, caused the boat drill scheduled for that day to be cancelled. The air grew bitterly cold as well despite the sunshine, and many passengers opted to remain indoors. Colonel Archibald Gracie chose to spend his early morning warming up in the squash court, before enjoying a dip in the swimming pool, which was heated to a refreshing temperature. After breakfast, since it was Sunday, church services were held in the first-class dining saloon at 10:30 a.m., being personally conducted by Captain Smith himself. They were well attended and concluded at around 11:15 a.m., with the hymn, Eternal Father, Strong to Save. A similar service was held in second class, led by Purser Reginald Barker in the dining saloon, with a Catholic Mass also being held in the second-class library by Reverend Thomas Biles, who afterwards went down to hold another Mass for third-class passengers. When the ship's daily run was posted that noon, it proved to be the best of the voyage so far. Her position was 43 degrees 2 minutes north, 44 degrees 31 minutes west, and since the previous noon, she had sailed 546 miles, at an average speed of 22.06 knots. If Titanic kept this speed up for the remainder of the crossing, she was guaranteed to arrive in New York sometime around 10 o'clock on Tuesday night. Earlier that morning, the 3 remaining unlit boilers in boiler room number 2 were lit, and were getting warmed up in preparation to being connected to the engines. The ship's speed would no doubt increase once they were brought online later in the day. If the weather permitted, the ship was due to be run at full speed the next day, for at least a few hours. On the lunch menu in first class that day were fillets of brill, chicken a la Maryland, corned beef and vegetable dumplings, mutton chops and a variety of potatoes, custard pudding, salmon mayonnaise, shrimps, anchovies, herrings and sardines, roast beef and ham pies, etc. Up to this point, the voyage had been largely uneventful, save for the near collision with New York when leaving Southampton. But passengers, at least those in first class, were finally going to get something to gossip and talk about. Miss Irene Renee Harris and her husband Henry, one of the most prominent producers on Broadway, had spent the afternoon at a poker game in one of the private promenades, with a number of other guests. The game broke up once the dinner bugle call came, and the Harrises were making their way back to their suite on C deck to dress for dinner. Renee slipped on a greasy spot on the grand staircase, likely from a dropped tea cake, and tumbled down 6 or 7 steps, breaking her right arm in the process. Her husband and a few other men quickly came to her aid and helped her back to the couple's suite, C83. Luckily for her, the ship's doctor was just down the hall from their suite, and Dr. O'Loughlin came to see her at once. He immediately declared her arm broken and started to set it in a cast when Mrs. Harris asked if a fellow passenger, Dr. Frothenhall, whom she had heard was famous as the head of a joint disease hospital in New York, could come to assist it as she felt the situation was too serious for just one man's opinion. Dr. O'Loughlin agreed, and soon Dr. Frothenhall came to see her as well, helping set her arm in a sling. Despite the broken arm, Mrs. Harris insisted on going to dinner in the restaurant, where the couple were to dine with the Futrells, a couple who had a stateroom near them, and with whom they'd been friendly during the voyage. Renee opted for a sleeveless dinner dress that night. It would be easier to put on with the sling. News of her mishap traveled fast, and while she was dressing, a dozen sympathy cards from other passengers were delivered to her room. Up on deck, a few passengers were admiring the gorgeous sunset. Miss Edith Rosenbaum, the fashion journalist, remembered it was blood red. If the old saying, "Red sky at night, sailor's delight," held true, Titanic was due fine and clear weather the following day. After the sun dipped below the horizon, passengers went down for dinner, and it would be one worth remembering. Sunday dinner on board a ship was always the grandest of the voyage. Titanic was no exception. Passengers remembered that the tables in the first-class dining saloon were finely decorated, with the room's table lamps likely being brought out to enhance the atmosphere. Special folding menus were set on each table, and the options available were magnificent. Dinner started off with hors d'oeuvres, followed by cream of barley soup, salmon with mousseline sauce, filet mignons Lily, lamb with mint sauce, sirloin of beef, punch romaine, roast squab and cress, before finishing off with mouth-watering desserts including Waldorf pudding, peaches and chartreuse jelly, chocolate and vanilla eclairs, and, finally, French ice cream. And this was just in the dining saloon. Up on B deck, the restaurant was decorated in equal, if not superior fashion, with vases of fresh-cut flowers, daisies, and beauty roses on each table. Among the patrons were the Astors, the Duff Gordons, and Mr. Ismay, who dined with Dr. O'Loughlin. The largest party was by far the Wideners, who were hosting a special dinner in honor of Captain Smith. The Thayers and Carters were among their guests. When Mr. and Mrs. Harris arrived, they were given a warm reception by the other diners, most of whom they'd never met. Renee jokingly thought that a broken arm was an asset. After dinner, passengers congregated in the reception room for drinks, while they listened to the ship's band. A perfect end to a perfect night. No doubt the finest of the voyage so far, and one to be remembered.